Hi, I'm Brian Snyder. I'm the pastor of Bower Hill Church, and I'm here to talk to you about our space, our worship space. People often enter this space and they wonder, what does it mean? Why are there no statues? Why is there so little stained glass? And yet it's still elegant and beautiful and inspiring. What does the space mean, the space that we worship in? And they're right. Worship space always has a meaning. There's always a theology that dictates what our worship space will look like. In fact, once we had a guest speaker come to speak to us in adult education. He was a Muslim, and he joined us for the last few minutes of our worship service. And he told me afterward that he felt very comfortable in our space because, in mosques, there are no statues and there are no figures, there are no icons. And their theology is similar to ours. The Presbyterian Church rose out of the Reformation of the 1500s, and at that time in medieval churches, people didn't know how to read mostly. And so they learned the Bible and they learned the traditions of the faith through the images in the stained glass. But when the Reformation came along, they said, no more. People need to learn to read the Bible in their own languages. And so they took hammers and they broke out much of the stained glass, which from an artistic point of view is probably a tragedy. But it was a way of getting people to learn how to read the biblical text for themselves. And so that's why our worship space is relatively sparse and yet still kind of pointing toward the grandeur and the beauty of God. We have mostly clear windows. And the one stained glass window we do have doesn't tell you any story, doesn't tell you what to think. It just follows the various colors of the liturgical year. And so our form of worship moved from the medieval learning the stories through the windows and never understanding the language of the Mass to a very word-centered kind of worship, where the pulpit would have been front and center and the most important item in any Presbyterian or Protestant church. In the 1950s, by the time this church was founded and this room was built, there was a move back toward a little bit of an emphasis on the life of the sacrament, on the sacramental life of the church. Not just preaching, but experiencing God also through Holy Communion at the table, through baptism certainly at the font. And that is why you'll notice that though everything in this room is a little bit off-white, anything that smacks of word and sacrament is pure white. And so the table is pure white. And the font where we baptize is pure white. And the font, of course, is adorned with the dove which was present at Jesus' baptism. And the table is adorned with the wheat and the grapes from the bread and the wine of communion. But the pulpit too. It's not a sacrament, it's word, so it's a little bit off-white. That's just the tradition of this church. But it is also one of the most prominent things you'll see in the room. It's no longer front and center, because now we are kind of like a family sitting around the dining room table. That's kind of the idea that you get in this room. We're all sitting around the table together, the whole way back over the years to that table in the upper room where Jesus was with his disciples. But the pulpit is still very prominent, and it's still a very important piece of furniture in our worship space. And on that pulpit is a verse from the Gospel of John that said, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us." And that's because the Word was always so central to Presbyterian and Protestant worship. But we're encouraging people to take the words you hear from the pulpit and make them real. Put them to work in your life and let them dwell among us in this community. And so that's our space. It's sparse, it's beautiful, but there's a reason for all that you see and don't see in this space. We don't condemn the traditions of others or their worship space. This is just how we do things here.